Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
A wife, a boss, and 8 other strangers. What could possibly be in common? That's what we're going to find out in today's story. Enjoy the show! The story begins like many others. My wife Tammy and I were married for over 14 years. We were high school sweethearts. Yes, it's a cliche, but I was the quarterback and she was the cheerleader. Things shifted a bit when she became prom queen, and I wasn't included in her circle. She was popular and loved by everyone, but I wasn't. That's not what this story is about, though. Tammy received a scholarship to the University of Michigan, while I got one from Michigan State. This meant I stayed home while she lived in a dorm and came home on weekends. We saw each other as often as possible and agreed that while we were apart, it would be okay to date others. Tammy didn't want to be intimate, saying she wanted to be sure we really loved each other first. During our senior year, I felt the need to push forward. When I saw Tammy, I told her it was time to either take the next step in our relationship or move on. We were at Burger King after a movie when I told her that if she still wasn't sure about us, she probably never would be, and maybe it was time to find someone else. She got upset, stormed out, and I didn't chase after her. I figured she'd cool off, and we could talk, but she didn't wait in the car as I expected. After searching for her and finding nothing, I drove home. When I called her the next day, her mother said Tammy didn't want to talk to me. I tried a few more times, but eventually gave up when she still hadn't called by Sunday evening. At that point, I figured I should move on and started seeing another girl, Pauline. We went out a few times, and while things hadn't progressed very far, I was optimistic about where it might lead. Then, on Friday, I came home to find Tammy sitting on my porch talking to my mom. It had been 3 weeks since she'd stormed out, and I hadn't heard from her. I was still hurt, so I ignored her and went straight inside to work on some school assignments. After a while, my mom came up and told me I needed to go talk to Tammy. Reluctantly, I went back downstairs. Tammy smiled at me, but her smile faded when I asked her, somewhat harshly, what she wanted. She started to get defensive but stopped herself. "I want you," she said. I wasn't going to let her off easily. "If you wanted me, why haven't I heard from you? Why did you avoid talking to me for 3 weeks?" I asked. She sighed, clearly frustrated but trying to keep her composure. "I was mad at you for pressuring me. I've been holding back because I felt like I had to wait until we were married." I told her I didn't care about waiting anymore. I wasn't going to be the only 20-year-old who hadn't experienced that side of a relationship, and I wasn't going to wait until marriage. "I've already started seeing someone else," I said. Tammy looked at me, clearly hurt. "Pauline called me to make sure we were done before she went any further with you." I told her we were still together. I told Tammy that if things didn't work out with Pauline, there were plenty of other options, but she was insistent that I reconsider. I asked Pauline to spread the word that you were busy. "Maybe you should have tested it with me first," she said. "What does that mean?" "Maybe I thought your leaving and refusal to talk meant we had broken up. Since we were no longer together, I figured I was free to look for someone else." "I meant it, Tammy. If after all these years, you still don't know if you really love me, then maybe you don't, and it's time for us to move on. I wish you a good life." I walked back into the house, leaving her sitting on the porch swing. Once inside, I tried to work on my coursework, but I couldn't focus. Eventually, I gave up and started flipping through channels on the TV until it was time for bed. The next morning, I called Pauline. "I talked to Tammy yesterday," I said. "She told me you called her." "Why?" "You're calling to cancel our date, aren't you?" she asked. "No, I'm calling to confirm it," I replied. "But I also want to let you know the date won't be what we both expected. I'll pick you up at 7 o'clock, okay?" "At 7 o'clock? That's fine. Thanks for calling." The date went well, and Pauline's conversation with Tammy never came up. At the end of the evening, I got a nice kiss, but it felt more like a farewell than anything else. The next week, I was too busy with classes, coursework, and projects to pursue another girl, but it didn't really matter. When Friday came around, I came home to find Tammy once again sitting on the porch swing talking to my mom. As soon as I walked up, my mother stood up and said, "I'll leave you two alone." Before I could say anything, Tammy spoke. "Last time I was here, you asked me what I wanted, and I said I wanted you. That's still all I want. I love you, Brian, but I was scared of committing. I kept thinking we were too young. I'm still scared, but I don't want to lose you." Our first time together was like many other couples. We shared intimate moments, and although they were enjoyable, it wasn't particularly adventurous. Tammy wasn't open to trying many things, and while I was a bit disappointed, I appreciated what we had and didn't press the issue. 6 weeks after graduating from college, we got married. We agreed to wait 5 years before having kids, but when we tried and it didn't work, we went to the doctor and found out Tammy couldn't conceive. One Saturday, I came home from work and heard Tammy excitedly say, "You'll never guess what just happened." "Then I probably won't try," I replied. "You'll have to tell me." Alice Medford and her husband just bought the house next door. You know, the Simpson house that's been on the market for over a year. They started moving in today. And who's Alice Medford? We were in the same sorority. I was getting the mail when she pulled up. We recognized each other right away, and she ran over to hug me. "I know you don't mind, but I invited them to dinner tonight since they haven't unpacked their kitchen yet." At 6 o'clock, the Medfords arrived, and Tammy introduced me to them. Have you ever met someone and instantly disliked them? That's how I felt, and not just about one of them, both. Alice had sly eyes, and her husband Frank always seemed to be grinning. I knew right away that I wasn't going to enjoy spending time with them. I did my best to be polite, but all I really wanted was for them to leave. Frank had attended Michigan with the women, and the three of them spent the evening chatting about people they knew and what they were doing now. After they left, Tammy asked me how I liked them. "They seem normal," I said, though I didn't mean a word of it. For the next few days, we didn't see much of the Medfords while they were busy moving in. Things went on as usual until my marriage began to deteriorate. One day, I took the afternoon off for a dentist appointment and ended up at home early. It was Tammy's birthday, and part of her job benefits included a paid day off, so we'd planned to celebrate that evening. Since she didn't get up when I did, she had no idea I was still at home. I was in my office working on some documents when the doorbell rang. Tammy answered, and it was Alice. Apparently, they had agreed to meet for coffee. My office was right behind the kitchen, and for some reason, whether it was the ventilation, thin walls, or something else, I could hear their conversation. At first, I tried to ignore it and focus on my work, but then I heard Alice say, "Frank wants you again. He asked me to set it up this morning." I froze, my papers forgotten, as I listened to Tammy's response. "You can't be serious." "I am." "Don't act so surprised. You've been with him enough before." "That was a long time ago, Alice. I was single then. I'm married now." "So what? Frank and I are married too, and that doesn't change anything. Does it bother you that he wants to be with me? Doesn't it bother you that he asked you to set it up? We have an open marriage, honey. He's free to be with whoever he wants, and so am I. Honestly, I want that too. Remember all the things the three of us used to do? That was years ago, Alice. I didn't have a husband back then. Maybe not, but you had a steady boyfriend, and that didn't stop you. If I remember, you used to say it was fun to be with others, but not with him. He never figured it out. He's not an idiot. Of course he is. How could he not know? If he's not an idiot, you must have forgotten, Tam, I was there. You weren't drunk. I keep telling you, I was free back then. Are you trying to tell me you've been faithful since you got married? Don't even bother, I won't believe it. There's no way the girl I knew back then could resist temptation, even if she's married. There was a pause, and then Alice added, "Wow. I bet your face says it all right now. You are cheating, aren't you?" "Not often, but sometimes." "How often?" "Maybe once a month." "Don't make me drag it out of you, just tell me everything." "My boss has a sales meeting once a month, and I'm rewarded if the guys do a good job." "How many?" "Only 8 or 9, not as many as the 15 or 16 I used to handle." "Brian hasn't noticed." "He really doesn't?" "Wow. After 8? God, Girl, he has no clue. Not really. I time it so it's close to my period. If it's too far away, I make excuses like headaches until I can adjust things. So, when can we meet? I don't think we can. Why not? It's too risky, too close to home, and Frank will always be Frank. What does that mean? Didn't you see his grin during dinner? That I know something you don't smile? No, Alice. I can't risk it. What if we got Brian involved? My Brian? She laughed. No way. He'd never agree to an open marriage. Besides, if by some miracle we convinced him, he'd figure out I was already seeing other guys before giving him the chance. He'd find out things I don't want him to know. I sat there, listening to these two women tear apart what was left of my marriage. Every word felt like a hammer blow, and yet, instead of rage, I felt an overwhelming sadness. I had wasted over 16 years on someone who clearly never loved me. They say you can't turn off love like a switch, but in that moment, I realized that wasn't true. In just 10 minutes, my love for Tammy vanished. I went from wanting to protect her with my life to thinking I couldn't wait to walk away from her forever. Hearing Tammy's words, I stood up, ready to storm into the kitchen, but I stopped myself. The damage was done. Yelling wouldn't change anything. I needed to be calm and figure out my next steps. I knew men who had gone through divorce, and I didn't want to come out of it broken like they did. Quietly, I opened the window, climbed out, and left. I drove to my dentist's office, thinking over the past 16 years, searching for signs that Tammy had been unfaithful. I couldn't recall anything obvious. The dentist appointment was routine, and within an hour, I was back at work. But my mind wasn't on the job. I kept replaying what I had overheard, and with each replay, my anger grew. What hurt most was that Tammy had said no to me, claiming we needed to wait until we were sure of love, all while betraying me with others. By the end of the workday, I had calmed down enough to head home, determined to pretend everything was normal until I figured out what to do. When I arrived, Tammy was dressed and ready for our evening out. To my surprise, Frank and Alice were there too. I invited them to join us, she said. I surprised myself by staying calm. Let's go, I said with a smile. We had dinner at a local spot, talking about old times. I sat there pretending to be interested, but inside, all I wanted to do was punch Frank. After dinner, we went to a nearby bar for drinks and dancing. It was inevitable that I'd end up dancing with Alice while Frank danced with Tammy. Watching them made me furious. Frank was dancing far too closely with Tammy, his hands resting in places they shouldn't have been, and she did nothing to stop him. After everything I had overheard that morning, I didn't care about Tammy anymore. To me, she had become a woman of no moral worth, but what Frank and she were doing in front of me, publicly, was deeply disrespectful. I hated enduring it, but I wasn't ready to confront Tammy just yet. I had to pretend, even though I promised myself that the day of reckoning would come. What Frank did with Tammy before we were married was one thing, but what he was doing now, right in front of me, had to be addressed. He would pay for that. Alice sat across from me, clearly reading my thoughts. They're old friends, Brian, she said. I forced a tight smile and didn't respond. I somehow made it through the rest of the evening without losing my temper. When we got home, Tammy wanted to be intimate. I figured it was because of her time dancing with Frank. But it was also her birthday, so I had to keep up appearances. I didn't make love to her, I went through the motions. Part of me thought about taking control of what she had denied me in the past, but I held back, reminding myself that I needed to keep her in the dark for now. The next day, I contacted a friend who was a divorce attorney. We set up a meeting for the following day. During our conversation, he confirmed what I already knew: I'd be financially ruined in the divorce. He was straightforward and told me I'd be better off leaving Tammy to file for the divorce herself, letting her take the lead. That way, I'd avoid paying massive legal fees and court costs. The other option was to turn a blind eye to everything and just continue with my life. I seriously considered his advice but found flaws in both paths. Leaving would mean losing the house, my basement workshop, and my beloved patio with the hot tub, all in exchange for a tiny apartment. The idea didn't sit well with me. The other option, staying and pretending nothing was wrong, was tempting, but I knew myself. Eventually, I'd snap. Still, it seemed like the best option in the short term, allowing me time to figure out a better way forward. Maybe, I thought darkly, I'd get lucky and Tammy would get hit by a bus. At least then, I'd collect her life insurance. For the next 2 weeks, things went on as usual. I didn't change my behavior toward Tammy, and she continued treating me like the fool she thought I was. Maybe I was making it harder than it needed to be, but deep down, I believed Tammy cared for me, just not in the way I had always wanted. We were approaching Tammy's usual girls' night, which meant she'd be spending time with her sales team. I had mentally prepared for it and thought I could handle it, but something happened on Wednesday that shattered my plan. I hadn't expected my patience to wear thin so soon. That night, I was supposed to meet some friends for bowling. On the way to the alley, I realized I'd forgotten my ball. I usually kept it in the trunk of my car, but I had taken it out while cleaning and forgot to put it back. Checking my watch, I realized I had time to swing by the house, grab the ball, and still make it to the lanes on time. When I walked into the house, what I saw stopped me cold. Tammy was kissing Frank Medford. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't notice me. Furious, I stormed in and punched Frank, throwing him out of the house. I returned to the living room, where Tammy was crying, desperately trying to cover herself. I didn't care about her tears. I took from her what she had refused me all these years and, after it was over, simply told her, "Be ready for a long talk in the morning." I rolled over and fell asleep. The next morning, Tammy tried to initiate intimacy again, but I wasn't interested. After she got out of bed and went downstairs, I took a shower, dressed for work, and headed to the kitchen. She was sitting there, still undressed, drinking coffee. She had already poured a cup for me, and I sat down, taking a sip. Tammy started to apologize. "I'm sorry, Brian, I cut her off. I don't want to hear it. I won't believe anything you say. You've been lying to me for years, so why should I believe anything now? I know a lot more than you think. Come on, Brian, seriously? I know it looked bad yesterday, but nothing happened. I was just stringing him along and was going to send him home. He's my friend's husband, for God's sake." "Thanks for confirming my suspicions," I said coldly. "What? What conclusion?" "That I can't believe a single word you say. I know everything about the Medfords and their open marriage. I know that you know too. I know everything you, Frank, and Alice did back then while you refused me. I know what Frank likes. I know how you've been unfaithful for years, and I know about your monthly meetings with your sales team." Tammy screamed, "I don't know who told you all this, but they lied." "You're just proving my point," I said, my voice calm despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "I can't believe a word you say. I know everything about the Medfords and their open marriage, and I know that you're aware of it, too. I know all about what you three had going on before, while you kept turning me down. I know how you act, just the way Frank likes it. I also know about your monthly meetings with your work colleagues," she yelled. "I don't know who told you all this, but whoever it was lied." "Well, you've just confirmed my conclusion. What are you talking about now?" I asked. "You said my source was a liar, right? So, what if I told you that the person I got all this information from is you?" Her face went pale as I revealed everything I had overheard while she and Alice were drinking coffee. From that day until now, I had spent my time deciding whether to stay or let her go. I hadn't made a final decision yet, but I wanted to give her the chance to choose for herself. "Me? You want me to decide?" "Yes, Tammy. You will decide whether we stay together or not. It's simple, Brian. Of course, I want to stay. I love you. I've loved you since we were kids. All I can say, Tam, is that you have a strange way of showing it. But just saying you love me isn't enough anymore. You need to prove it, and honestly, I'm not sure you can. Tell me what to do, Brian. I'll do anything to save our marriage. You might not know this because I never talked about it, but I've had my own fantasies, Tam. I never mentioned them because you always turned me down. What I've wanted, more than anything, is to see you with someone else. Now, knowing what you've been doing behind my back, my fantasy has changed. I I want to watch it." Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. "I know it won't be too much of a challenge for you. After all, you've been doing this long before we got married. But the real question is, can you do it knowing I'm watching? Can you handle facing me afterward? If it saves our marriage, Brian, I can do it. Then, we'll do it my way. It'll be here, in this house. You can tell the guys I'm out on business, and you want the thrill of using our bed. They'll jump at the chance, especially since they've been sneaking around behind my back anyway. This will be an even bigger thrill for them. Are you serious?" "Dead serious. You go through with this, and then we'll talk about the future. If not, I'm leaving." "When? When's your next meeting?" "I overheard you talking with Alice. Isn't it coming up?" "Tonight." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I'll be across the street in the guest room. Leave the bedroom door open. I'll leave the door to the guest room just open enough to see, but you should get ready and head to work. We don't want you being late on one of your big days. Call me before you leave the office, and I'll make myself scarce. Try not to get nervous or look around for me. We don't want to tip your friends off." I left the house but didn't go to work. Instead, I stopped for coffee and called in sick, then headed to the store. I picked up a video camera from Best Buy and found some aluminum ladder supports at Home Depot. When I got back home, I set up the ladder against the back wall of the house, just outside our bedroom window, where I could watch everything unfold. I didn't trust Tammy not to warn her friends, and I wasn't going to risk being seen snooping from the guest room. I went into our bedroom and adjusted the blinds, leaving a small gap at the bottom, just enough to see into the room without being obvious. It would be dark, and with no light behind me, I figured I'd be fine. The last thing I did was hide the voice-activated recorder alongside the camera. Then I went to the kitchen, drank a beer, and waited for Tammy's call. The phone rang at 6 o'clock. "We just left," Tammy said. "Did they believe it?" "Just like you thought, they were thrilled about the chance. I always knew they were jerks, but I didn't expect them to show it so clearly." "Yeah, it's funny," she said. "They used to be polite, treating me like I was just, someone who enjoyed herself. But the second I suggested doing it in your bed, they started saying all kinds of nasty things about you. It's never been about you, Brian, it's always been about me. I am what you said I am." "Well, we'll be there in 20 minutes. It was exactly what I expected. There were 9 of them, and I knew every single one. I had met them at company parties, picnics, and barbecues. The big surprise was seeing Dan Traynor, Tammy's boss. I had a feeling he might be involved, given how he treated her at work, but I didn't expect him to be so bold. His wife, Debbie, owned the company. Her father had left it to her when he passed. Debbie was fiercely protective of Dan, always keeping a close eye on him at events. The group started off by drawing cards to decide who would go first, but that didn't last long. After half an hour, order had completely broken down. I had already recorded over an hour of footage by then, so I set the camera on a shelf and pulled out my phone. I decided to stir the pot a little. I called the house phone, expecting everyone to panic and give Tammy a chance to answer. To my surprise, Dan was the one who picked up. "Hello? Who is this?" I asked, pretending to be cheerful, as if I was excited to have someone answer my phone while I was supposedly away. "Brian? It's Dan. Tammy's in the bathroom, and I thought it was you calling. Why are you there?" Her car wouldn't start when she left work, so I dropped her off. She asked me to help her find someone to pick it up in the morning. I figured Tammy might be rattled by getting a call from me when she thought I was across the street watching, but she handled it like a pro, unsurprising, given how well she'd played the role of a faithful wife all these years. She got on the phone, keeping her tone light. "Hi, honey. Just checking in to let you know I made it home safe. Love you. I played along. Got it, sweetie. Love you too." She handed the phone back to Dan, and after he hung up, they carried on. I considered leaving the camera running but decided I had more than enough. I went to Bud's bar, had a few beers, and played pool with some familiar faces while I waited for Tammy to call. It was nearing closing time, and I started thinking I might need to find a motel for the night. Just as I was about to leave, Tammy finally called. "The last one just left," she said. "I'm going to change the sheets before you come home." When I arrived, Tammy was waiting for me in a dress that was clearly meant to catch my attention. The day had been emotionally exhausting, and before long, I drifted off to sleep. As I was falling asleep, I heard her whisper softly, "Don't leave me, baby. Please don't leave me." I woke up to the smell of coffee. After a quick shower, I got dressed in a t-shirt, shorts, and sneakers, then grabbed the morning paper from the porch. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw Tammy sitting at the table, staring into her coffee cup. She looked up at me, but her usual warm smile was missing. Instead, there was a mix of concern and uncertainty in her eyes. I could sense what she was thinking, but I didn't want to make it easy for her. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down, and opened the newspaper to the sports section. The Broncos had beaten the Patriots and were headed to the Super Bowl to face the Panthers. The paper was full of commentary and predictions about the upcoming game. After a few minutes of silence, Tammy finally spoke. "What are you going to do, Brian? Are we going to be okay?" I put the newspaper down and looked at her. "I don't know, Tam. Honestly, I don't. I feel confused. Last night was tough, seeing what I saw. But at the same time, I can't help but think, 14 years. You've been doing this for 14 years without ever giving me any hint of what you've given to others. How can you say you love me and do that? There's a war going on in my head, Tam. Part of me wants to see it again, but another part of me is telling me to leave and never look back." I paused for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I need time to think. Can my desire to understand what's been going on outweigh the pain of knowing you've been hiding this from me for so long? Can I trust you when you say you love me, even though your actions have said otherwise?" I stood up, finished my coffee, and said, "I'm going for a run. When I get back, I want to hear everything, how it started, what you did, and with whom. I need the whole truth, Tam. If I even suspect you're lying, I'll leave." In truth, I had already decided to leave, but I wasn't planning on her finding out until I had set everything in motion. The plan was simple, though not exactly legal. I was going to blackmail the men who had been with Tammy, demanding money that would balance out whatever she'd get in the divorce. It was risky, but I figured they'd pay up when they realized what they stood to lose if I exposed them. When I returned from my run, I found Tammy sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me. The coffee cup had been replaced by a bottle, and Tammy looked as nervous as a cat with a long tail in a room full of swaying chairs. I poured myself a cup of coffee, put it in the microwave, and set it for a minute or 30 seconds. When the beep sounded, I took the cup, sat down at the table, and said, "Okay, Tammy, go ahead. I love you, Brian. I really love you and don't want to lose you," she began. "It's a little late to start thinking about it now," I said. "I want to hear it when I get back, so here you go." Alice persuaded me to go to a party with her and her boyfriend, Frank. They supposedly had a non-alcoholic punch for non-drinkers. Later, I found out that it was flavored with something. Alice wanted me to go with her because Frank's friends had seen me and wanted me. At the party, they introduced me to Jared. He clung to me and said he would show me everything. He led me to a barrel of beer and prepared to pour me a cup, but I said I didn't drink. Then he led me to the supposedly non-alcoholic punch and poured me a cup. He continued to pour it for me, and I began to get drunk. I didn't realize this because I had never been drunk before, it just meant I was having a good time. I danced a lot with Jared and other guys. Jared continued feeding me punch, and I became more and more relaxed, allowing the guys I was dancing with to be more free with their hands. Then suddenly, I realized that I had been with 11 guys that night, some of them twice. I managed to attend class the next day, but I don't remember what I studied. All I could think about was what I had done the night of the party. The problem was, I wanted to repeat it. I really liked it, I was going crazy. It was the same with night. I no longer drank to the point of being unconscious like the first time. I decided when, where, and mostly who. I say mostly because when I was in the moment, I got so carried away that sometimes I didn't even know who I was with. The reason you didn't get anything was because I loved you and didn't want to lose you. Do you realize how stupid this sounds? No, it's not stupid, Brian. I had a damn good reason for not letting you make love to me. I did this 2 or sometimes 3 times a week, and if I had let you make love to me on the weekends when I came home, you would have realized what I was doing and thrown me out onto the street. You would have wondered how the girl I supposedly was could be so promiscuous. You would have asked yourself many questions. I couldn't let you think about it and ask the questions that would pop up in your head. So, because I loved you and didn't want to lose you, I didn't let you make love to me. When you finally got tired of not being able to make love to me and told me what you were going to do, I was afraid I would lose you to some other girl, so I stopped participating in it and then let you make love to me. I love when we started making love. I stopped until I started working for Dan. I didn't know that he was one of the anonymous guys I had been with earlier, and he remembered me. I worked there for a little over 3 months when he invited me to lunch. During lunch, he said he remembered me and wanted to know if I was still doing this. I said no, since I got married. He asked if I was happily married, and when I said yes, he asked if I would like to keep it. Of course, I said yes. Then he opened his briefcase, took out an envelope, and asked if I would have stayed with you if you had seen what was in the envelope. I opened the envelope and found 14 8x10 photos of me with other guys. His price for not showing them to you was that I would become his toy. I couldn't let you see these photos, so I gave in. At first, it was just Dan, but after a couple of months, he said I would be the sales team's reward for a great month, and I gave in again. You would never know, but I liked being part of it, so I agreed. Now you know everything. No, I don't know everything. I still don't understand why you refuse to do the same things to me even though you just told me how much you enjoy it. Remember how I acted the other day when you did that? She nodded in agreement. You knew from the conversation with Alice that I liked it, so the behavior didn't come as a shock to you. But what would you think if you saw me like that for the first time? What questions would pop into your head? In my understanding, I did not deny you anything. I defended our marriage. I tried my best to ensure you had no reason to think about what I might do when I was away. I couldn't let you see what I was capable of. This is all selfish nonsense, and you know it. At any moment, you could have said you'd try it to see how it was and then pretended to like it a second time until I got used to your way. You could have let me believe that we were studying together, but you didn't, did you? What you did was accidentally let me know what you were doing. You loved being in control and missed it after marriage, so you decided to take back that power and control by controlling our intimate life. All this ends now. Do you want to see control? Just look at me. From now on, I'll do whatever I want to you, any damn time I want, and you won't dare refuse me. The first time you refuse, I will throw you out, and you can go live with your friends. I want it all and completely, and you will do it or get the hell out. Forget about us making love anytime soon until I decide what to do with your cheating 5th place. We will only have a night. Understood? And what if I don't agree? Then get the hell out. New mode starts now. Go to the bedroom, undress, and wait for me to come. She looked at me thoughtfully, then stood up and headed to the bedroom. I gave her a couple of minutes, then got up and found her just as I'd instructed. Tammy went shopping for about an hour. As I watched her drive away, I wondered how long I could keep her in the dark, thinking that I would stay and that what was going on between us was just a rough patch that we would eventually leave behind. I was watching Tammy's car drive down the street when I heard, "Hey, idiot." I turned around and saw Frank walking across the lawn toward me. Last time you took me by surprise, but this time it will be different. I'll kick your 5th place. It didn't bother me because I was confident I could beat him and was prepared to do so. Frank was a loudmouth and the type to chat before a strike. My plan was to yell at him as soon as he got close. I saw Alice standing on their porch and smiling, and at the same time, I noticed Mrs. Jolly watching from across the street. Apparently, she heard Frank and that got her attention. I also noticed a postman putting mail in a box. In the blink of an eye, I changed the plan. When Frank approached me, I smiled at him and said in a quiet voice that no one else could hear, "You're a coward, Frank. You couldn't beat a 10-year-old. This provoked him to start a fight. I saw Alice run into the house and hoped it was to call the police. Either she did it or someone else did, and there must have been a car nearby. The police car stopped in front of the house, and 2 police officers got out. One shouted, "Get away from him! Do it now!" I stepped back, and one of the officers leaned over to look at Frank, while the other came up to me and asked, "What's going on here?" Before I could say anything, the postman came and said, "I saw everything, officer." The guy on the ground attacked him, and all he did was defend himself. "Look, I have this on my phone." The policeman watched the video, then looked at me and asked, "Is this what happened, sir?" "Yes, and I think Miss Jolly across the road saw everything too." "Did he have any reason to attack you?" "In his head, maybe. I came home the other day and found him kissing my wife in our kitchen. You could say I pulled him out of the house quite decisively." "How decisively?" I pointed to the broken rose bushes and said, "I threw him off the porch. Not that it has anything to do with this incident, but is your wife okay?" I understood what he was getting at and said, "I've never laid a hand on her since we got married. If you want, wait until she returns from shopping and you can ask her." "I assume you want to press charges against him?" "Yes." He turned to his partner and said, "Put handcuffs on him and put him in the car." He wrote down the postman's name, address, and telephone number and asked him to come into the station to get a copy of the video. Then he crossed the road and took a statement from Mrs. Jolly. As the car drove away with Frank in the back seat, I saw Alice standing on the porch watching them drive away. I shouted to her, and she turned around to look at me. "Where's your wide smile now?" "Go to hell," she said angrily and went into the house. I got into the car, drove to the police station, signed some documents, and returned home. I went into the bedroom, took the recorder, and listened to it. The mans mostly made fun of me at my expense. Tammy didn't join them, but she didn't defend me either. I took out the film, inserted a new one, and returned the recorder to its place. I was in the garage working on an old Harley Panhead I was trying to restore when Tammy came home from shopping. She went into the garage and said, "Alice called me on my mobile and said that you put Frank in prison." Not true. Frank put himself in prison. He attacked me in our front yard in front of witnesses, and the cops took him away. What does that matter to you? Alice is my friend. No, not a friend. Why do you say that? You always forget that I overheard your conversation. You told her straight up that you wanted nothing to do with Frank and explained why. She either didn't tell him or told him you didn't really mean it. These are not the actions of a friend, but I don't think you really meant it. You didn't resist him. What are you going to do, press charges against him? Why? Because this idiot came into my front yard and attacked me? Is this the real reason, or are you doing this because of our past relationship? They are inseparable, and you know it. Your past relationship is what brought him into the house and what you were doing when I walked in. What I did to him that night is what brought him here today. He was going to take revenge on me, but things didn't go as he expected. Can't you soften up a little? They are our neighbors, and it wouldn't hurt if we could get along with them and at least be polite. Keep talking, Tammy, and I'll start to think you want to get back together with them. She looked sour, turned around, and returned to the house. Dinner was quiet, and it was obvious Tammy was mad at me, but I didn't care. When it was time to go to bed, Tammy put on her pajamas and got into bed. I slept until Sunday. When I woke up, I went to the kitchen to get coffee and found that coffee was already brewed. There was a note taped to the coffee pot saying Tammy had gone to her parents'. I assumed it meant she didn't want to be around me. I just shrugged my shoulders and drank a couple of cups of coffee while reading the morning paper. The sports column was full of excitement about the upcoming Super Bowl. There was a lot of talk about Cam Newton being the epitome of Superman, and I couldn't quite deny it after watching the Panthers beat the Cardinals. But I was a die-hard Broncos fan and thought their defense could shut down Newton. I finished my coffee, drove to IHOP for pancakes, then came home and started working on the Panhead, planning out the upcoming week. Tammy got home around 4 o'clock but didn't come up to the garage until 6 o'clock when she came to tell me dinner was ready. Dinner was quiet again, and after eating, I went into the living room and watched TV. Around 8 o'clock, Tammy told me she was going to bed. "I'll be up in 10 minutes, I told her. "Be ready for me." She didn't say a word, just went upstairs. When I returned to bed, Tammy asked, "Will you ever make love to me properly again?" Maybe someday, but right now I need to make up for lost years, I replied. I went to bed, turned over, and fell asleep. I had already agreed with my boss to take half a day off on Monday. Tammy worked 4 days a week, 10 hours a day from Tuesday to Friday, so she wasn't home on Mondays. When I arrived at Dan's office, he was surprised to see me, but I could tell by his behavior that he wasn't prepared for what I was about to tell him. I remembered what Tammy had told me about her lunch with him and used the same words he had used with her. I asked him if he was happily married, and although he was a little confused by the question, he answered yes. I placed my laptop on his desk so that he could see the screen clearly and asked, "Do you want to save your marriage?" "Certainly." "Would your wife want to stay with you if she saw this?" His face paled as he looked at the recording I made from the stairs. He asked, almost in a whisper, "What do you want?" I smiled and said, "It's a no-fault state, so in a divorce, everything is split in half. I don't think this is fair. I don't see why the guilty party shouldn't pay, but the law is the law, and I can't change it. What I can do, or try to do, is make sure I don't get ripped off on this deal. Between our savings and the equity in our house, I think Tammy and I will split $82,000. Because of the law, I can't stop her from getting $41,000, but I can get away with $82,000 or at least get $81,000 in the pleasure of revenge. Everything is simple, really. I admit that it is undoubtedly illegal, but then cheating was also once illegal. My solution to the problem is simple. You and the other guys in this video need to raise $45,000 for me, or copies of what you're watching now will be given to all your wives, families, and friends. I will also create a website where everyone can see it. You'll also need to keep Tammy at work and maybe give her a raise so I don't have to pay her child support. Why $45,000? You said your half would be $41,000, but I have to pay attorney fees and court costs, and I don't think I should take that out of my share. You guys created the problem, so it's only fair that you pay the bill. I expect the money by Friday next week. This gives you almost 2 weeks to raise the funds. If one of the guys can't raise the money, the rest will have to cover his share. I don't care how you do it, but if I don't get $45,000 by Friday in 2 weeks, I'll distribute the video. 2 more things. First, Tammy doesn't know that I'm going to leave her cheating 5th place, and I don't want her to find out until I'm ready, so you need to make sure she doesn't know what I'm doing. Secondly, and most importantly for you and the others, you need to know that someone is holding all the information. If anything happens to me, not only will everyone I've already mentioned get a copy of the video, but the police will also receive a copy with an explanation. I turned off the laptop, stood up, and said, "Have a good day. I'll contact you." I left his office and went to work. When I arrived at work, my boss Mike called me into his office. I told him why I needed the morning off, so he wasn't surprised when he asked what my plans were for the future. I told him I hadn't thought about it yet. I expected that the only change in my life would be that I would be single again. "Have you thought about moving?" Mike asked. "Not really. It might be hard for you to stay here. You'll constantly go to places like restaurants that will remind you of your life with Tammy. Plus, you'll probably run into her from time to time, and that will only bring back bad memories. If you'd like, I can see if there are vacancies that would suit you in our other branches. It wouldn't hurt to know what other options I had." Mike said he would take a look, and I left his office, went to my room, and started working. When I returned home that evening, Tammy had already prepared dinner. We ate in silence, but I could tell she wanted to say something but was obviously nervous. She was afraid I might not want to hear it or that she wasn't ready to hear what I might say. Finally, she plucked up her courage. "Are we going to be okay, Brian? I really love you and don't want to lose you." The truth was that no, we weren't going to be okay. I was already on my way out, she just didn't know it yet. Considering how she has been all these years, I didn't care that she thought we might have a chance to get over this. I said, "Honestly, I don't know, Tam. I have a huge mountain of anger inside me because of what you did. It's quite a big mountain, and I don't know if I have the strength to climb to the top and see what's there. Therefore, I cannot answer your question. All I can say is that we will have to wait and see." I helped put away the dishes, then went into the living room and turned on the TV. I don't even remember what I watched because my thoughts were preoccupied with what I wanted and what I needed to do. Before bed, I went upstairs to find Tammy on the bed, without clothes and waiting. I could have been a nice guy and pretended to make love, but I had too much anger in me to do that. I finished, lay down, turned over, and fell asleep. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard her quietly crying, and my last conscious thought was, suffer, stupid, suffer. The rest of the week was much the same. We didn't talk much, and I saw that she was on pins and needles, expecting something, good or bad, but something from me. On Friday morning, I called Dan and asked if everything was going according to plan or if I needed to stock up on envelopes for the packages. I'm working on it. A couple of guys are reluctant, but I'm working on it. Remind them that a divorce will cost them much more than what they need to collect to satisfy me. Can't you soften up a little? Never. In fact, I half hope you don't collect the money so I can ruin all your marriages the same way you ruined mine. I'll call you next Thursday and find out if we need to meet on Friday or not. And by the way, in case you haven't already guessed, this is a cash deal. See you at 3 o'clock. Mike called me into his office. How about Denver? What's in Denver? The office there needs a regional manager, and none of those currently working in the office are qualified for this position. You're qualified, and Dave asked me if you'd be interested. I didn't have to think long and answered, I would love to try it. He gave me Dave Miller's number and told me to call him. I went back to my office and called Dave Miller. We talked for about 20 minutes, and I ended up having to fly to Denver for a longer conversation. I returned to Mike's office and agreed to take Friday off to fly. When I got home, I told Tammy that I had to fly to Miami on Friday for a meeting and that I would be back late on Saturday. I said Miami instead of Denver because I didn't want her to think about Denver when I was gone. I knew that if she hired a professional, she could eventually find me, but I hoped she wouldn't even try. Negotiations in Denver went well, and I accepted the position. I told Dave that I would need 2 weeks to get things done at home before I could start work. I returned home at 8 o'clock in the evening and told Tammy I would be back late on Saturday because I wanted to see what she would do if I left town. The first floor was dark, but the second floor was all lit up. There were cars parked in the driveway and on the street, so I had my answer to what she would do if she thought I was gone. I rarely go on business trips, usually only once or twice a year, and I assume that this probably happens every time I'm away. I drove to the end of the street, turned the corner, and parked. I returned to the house, quietly retrieved the ladder from the garage, and set it in place. When I went upstairs and looked through the gap in the blinds, I saw what I expected. I only knew 2 other people in the room, Frank and Alice. Apparently, Alice found enough money to get him out of jail. I took out my cell phone, set it to take photos, and snapped a few pictures. I tested them, and although the quality wasn't great, they were sufficient for what I needed. I remembered the last time I looked out from the stairs and smiled as I pressed the speed dial button on my home phone. The phone rang, and I watched everyone move so Tammy could answer. I wondered if she would answer or just let it go to voicemail. Apparently, she decided that leaving the phone unanswered might make me think badly, so she picked up. Hello, it's me. I finished earlier than I thought and have just arrived. I stopped by the office to drop off documents, so I'll be home in 20 minutes. Be ready. I ended the call and watched as Tammy desperately tried to interrupt the process and get everyone out of the house. It was comical watching her try to disperse them. Eventually, she managed to convince them that I was on my way home, and they all left. The men quickly got dressed and scattered, and Alice helped Tammy change the bed linens and clean the room. Then Alice went downstairs while Tammy went to the shower. I climbed down from the ladder, put it away, and placed it near the back wall of the garage. I walked around the house to check if anyone was nearby. All the cars had left, and I didn't see anyone, so I went to my car, drove to the nearest gas station to fill up and kill some time so Tammy could get cleaned up, and then went home to my loving wife. Unless you look specifically, there were no traces of what had happened in the room. On Saturday, I began the other part of my revenge on Tammy. I started being kind to her and then pretended to make love to her. I was sure this gave her hope that I might be softening up and that we might have a chance to save our marriage. After we finished, I told her not to worry about breakfast because I was going to take her out to eat. We didn't talk much on the way to the restaurant, but as we ordered and waited, I told Tammy that I had a lot of time to think during the flight. Although I still love you, I have a hard time convincing myself that I can trust you. I can't forget how easily you deceived me all these years. How can I be sure you won't do this again? I promise you, honey, I will never do anything to hurt us again. I really love you, Brian, and I will do anything not to lose you. You say this, but how can I be sure? I don't know, Brian, but I'll do whatever you want to prove it to you. I need to think about it more, but there's one thing I have to say. Even though I said I wanted to see it again, watching you do what I had always refused to do actually killed any desire to see it again. I felt it the next day and promised myself I would never do it again. I should probably quit my job. I don't think Dan will want to see me when I tell him I won't be with him anymore or for monthly meetings. This is another part of my problem, Tam. You said how much you loved it, and I saw how much you loved it when I watched. How can I, after seeing it with my own eyes, believe that you won't want it again? No, Brian, I used to love it, but the only reason I did it since I started working for Dan was because of his threat of exposure. Now you know, so he no longer has any leverage over me. Inside, I was laughing at the lies. Every time she opened her mouth, she nailed another nail in her coffin. I hear what you're saying, Tam, but how can I trust anything you say considering what you've been doing all these years? I love you, Tammy, and I desperately want to believe you. You can do it, Brian. I will do anything to prove it to you. Just give me a chance. I think I'll have to, Tam. I love you too much not to try to save our marriage. But I won't lie to you, it won't be an easy fight. It will take time, and there will be difficult moments. You must be prepared for harsh and unpleasant words from me. I'm still very angry about what you did, and I'm only human, Tam. It will come out from time to time, and it will be hard for you to hear it. I will try my best, but you have to be patient with me. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you with me, Brian. I swear. I smiled at her. We finished breakfast and went home. I spent the rest of the day doing chores until Tammy called me over for dinner. We made love that night. She made love, but for me, it was just an intim. We fell asleep hugging each other. Sunday went much the same as Saturday. Woke up, pretended to make love, went to brunch, came home and pretended to make love again, had dinner, watched TV, more fake love, and as Tammy drifted off to sleep, I heard her mutter, "We'll be fine, Brian." I just smiled. I rolled over and looked at my watch. It was 5:20, but the alarm wasn't supposed to ring until 6. I wondered why I woke up. I usually sleep until the alarm goes off. Something was spinning in my head. Something told me, oh damn, all my great plans are going to hell because I forgot one simple thing. I cannot just disappear and leave Tammy behind. If I'm going to get my half of our assets, I need to start the divorce process, and my lawyer needs to know where I stand, which means Tammy will know too. I'll have to hand her the papers before I leave so she knows I'm leaving. How could I be such a fool? I got out of bed and went downstairs to make coffee. I've always thought more clearly after drinking a hot cup of coffee. It didn't take me long to think things through. I needed to meet with Jay as soon as possible and try to get Tammy served with the paperwork before I left for Denver. I got dressed and left. Tammy was still sleeping when I left the house, and I wondered what she would think when she woke up. I hoped for good thoughts. I wanted to keep her in the dark until the very end. I stopped at Waffle House for breakfast, and while I ate, I made a mental list of things I needed to discuss with Jake. I called Jake, and he told me to come right away. I explained what was going on and what I hoped to do, and he said it was no problem. He could have the papers ready to sign by noon the next day, file them with the court before 10 in the morning, and Tammy could be served with them any time after that. He then told me that he had always had a thing for Tammy and asked if I would mind if he tried to hit on her after she was served the papers. I laughed and told him to act with a plan to get back on the rails. I called Tammy at work around 2 o'clock in the afternoon and told her that I had to fly out of town that evening and wouldn't be back until late Tuesday. The auditors wouldn't be able to meet with me until 1 o'clock tomorrow, and if there were delays, I might miss my flight. I might not even be back until Wednesday. I need to run, honey. I need to go home, pack my things, and go to the airport. I love you, darling. Let's talk later. There was no travel. I was just setting things up so she could have a night with others again, and I could film it. The more dirt I had on her, the less she would want to fight for a divorce. I actually went home, packed a bag with things for a couple of days, and the last thing I did before leaving home was change the tape in the voice recorder. I drove to the airport, parked my car in the long-term parking lot, and rented another one. I checked into the hotel and settled down to wait. Tammy finished work at 5 o'clock, so at 10 minutes to 5 o'clock, I drove to the house, parked outside, and waited. Tammy arrived home at 5:35. At 6 o'clock, Alice left their house and came into ours. At 6:10, Frank returned home, and 5 minutes later, he entered my house. At 7 o'clock, it was dark enough for me to do what I wanted. I walked around the house and set up a ladder. I climbed up, set up my video camera, went downstairs, got into my rental car, and drove to Duke's Steakhouse for dinner. 2 hours later, I returned. It was time to cause chaos. I took out my phone and dialed my home number. "Hello," I said, adopting a sad tone. "It's me." "You sound depressed." "Yes, what happened?" "You don't want to know." "Of course I do. I can't console you if I don't know what happened. I'm sitting here imagining you having an intimate with your friends while I'm gone." "Oh no, Brian, I promised you I wouldn't do it again, and I kept my word." "Sorry, dear. I told you it wouldn't be easy for us." "I know, but I promised you, Brian, and I meant every word." "Okay, honey, I just called to say I love you." "I love you too, honey, and don't ever doubt it." "I'll call you tomorrow." "Love you. Bye." I hung up and watched as Tammy ended the call. She said something to Frank and Alice, and all three laughed. Tuesday repeated Monday, but this time there were 4 more guys with Frank and Alice. I recognized 3 of them from previous meetings. I set up the camera again and left for dinner. I went home earlier in the day after signing papers at Jake's, replaced the tape in the recorder, and was really looking forward to listening to the tapes. If I'm lucky, I'll have some good dirt on Tammy when the time comes. 2 hours later, I returned. Tammy and Alice were busy. I took out my phone and was about to press the speed dial button when I told myself it was time. I turned off the camera, went downstairs, and removed the ladder. I drove back to the motel, parked, and went to the bar across the street. I drank 2 beers, then returned to my room and went to bed. On Wednesday, I called Tammy at work and told her I'd be back by 5 o'clock. She rushed home at 5:30, hugged me, kissed me, and told me how much she missed me. The bedroom showed no signs of what had happened there the last 2 nights. We had a night. Tammy pretended to make love. On Thursday, when I arrived at my office, I locked the door, took the tapes out of the recorder, and began looking for the recording of Monday's call. I found the right place and started listening. Then the phone rang. I listened to Tammy lie, and then she hung up. It was just an idiot making a test call. Everyone laughed. We need to find a way to do this on a regular basis. It's bad that you can only do it when he leaves. I'm working on it, Tammy said, but it will take time. I have to get him back to where he doesn't think that every time I'm not around, I'm having an intim with someone. Why worry? Ditch the useless idiot and move in with us. I don't think this will work. I know myself and will always want to have my own man. No problem, dear. Any of the guys Frank brings to the party will gladly become your permanent man. You think so? I know it. A couple have already asked what needs to be done for you to leave this idiot and move on to them. Wasn't Denny one of them? Yes. Why do you ask? Are you interested? He's nice looking and well equipped. Oh, you? And they all laughed. When the recording ended, I didn't even listen to the second tape. If I had not already decided to get rid of my unfaithful wife, what I just heard would have done it for me. I had everything I needed, so I took a deep breath and got to work. At 3 o'clock, I called Dan. I hope you have the money so I can start mailing. I have it. It wasn't easy, but I got it. Let's do it tonight instead of tomorrow then. Fitz, let's do it. Meet me at Bud's Bar at 7 o'clock tonight. I will be there. I was sitting in a booth waiting for him when he arrived. I took a chance that he liked beer and ordered him a pint. Tina brought it over. As soon as he sat down, he handed me the case, and I took it and placed it next to me on the seat. Aren't you going to count it? Not necessary. If it's not enough, you know what I will do. How can I be sure that you won't do this anyway? We both know what your wife will do if she sees the video. You'll be history, and you won't be able to keep Tammy at work. I need her to work so I don't have to pay her child support. I think you should give her a raise if you continue to use her as a reward for your salespeople. Oh, I'm going to. In fact, she came to me this week and said that you are suspicious of her. She promised me that she would stop. Then she laughed and said that all that needed to change was the location. Now it would happen at work, not after. There's one thing I want to explain to you. I never blackmailed her. She recognized me during the interview, and I recognized her too. I remembered and wanted to be able to do it again. We started doing this before the end of her first week with me. One day, after a passionate long lunch, I was talking about declining sales and the need to start laying people off. She suggested that there could be an award for the best salesperson of the month, and from then on, it grew to a group award if the month was successful. Are you sure you can't accept this and stay with her? Never. Some guys could do it, but I'm not one of them. I'm one of those who believes that my woman belongs only to me, and if she ceases to be only mine, the relationship ends. I looked at my watch and said I had to go. I stood up and said, "Take care of Tammy, okay?" I loved her once. When I got home, I acted like things would work out between us and was even affectionate when we made love. She snuggled up to me afterward. She had no idea that this was our last time. It was a normal Friday morning until I left the house. I drove to U-Haul and picked up the trailer I had reserved, then drove back to our area. I parked a block away and went to make sure Tammy's car was gone. After confirming she had left for work, I pulled the U-Haul up to the garage door, and by 1 p.m., I had everything I wanted out of the house. When I picked up the trailer, I also stopped by the bank and, just to be a fifth place, withdrew 70% from our checking and savings accounts instead of the 50% I was legally entitled to in the divorce. I might have to return some later, but like I said, I was a fifth place. I drove the car and trailer down the block and back to the house, then sat down at the kitchen table and started canceling credit cards and setting the scene for Tammy when she got home from work. I hoped that luck would be on my side and my timing would work. She entered the house at 5:20, and seeing that my car was not in the driveway, was surprised to see me. She came up to me, leaned in to kiss me, and I let her. She started to open her mouth, probably to ask where my car was, but I raised my hand and said, "Sit down, Tammy. We need to talk." She looked at me worriedly. "About what?" "About us. We'll be fine, Brian. You said we'd work it out. We're not going to be okay, Tammy. For all the reasons I've talked about, especially because I can't trust you." I promised, "Brian. I'm not." I hit the table with my hand and shouted, "You lied." I turned the laptop so she could see the screen and turned it on. I watched her face as she saw the scene with Frank and Alice from the other night. There was no sound, but when she saw herself answering the phone, I pressed a button on the recorder, and she heard her words watching herself say them on the screen. She looked at the screen silently and pale. The doorbell rang, and I said, "You need to open it, Tam. This is for you." She looked at me blankly, and I said, "Go. This is for you." She stood up and opened the door. I wish I could have seen her face when she opened the door, received the envelope, and heard the words, "You have been served with a notice." The court courier was waiting in a car across the street. When she arrived home, I asked him to give me 10 minutes before ringing the doorbell. She returned to the kitchen, sat down, and stared at the envelope in her hands. Then she looked at me and asked weakly, "What should I do now?" "Continue living without me. You can handle this. You don't have to quit your job or give up your bonus nights. You have 2 clowns in your neighborhood who will be your permanent partners, and you already have an idea who will replace me, right? Denny, a guy who looks good and is well equipped." She had the courage to wince at that. "The only big decision you have to make is whether to buy my half of the house or sell it and split the money. I'm leaving town, and my lawyer's business card is in the envelope. He knows how to find me if he needs to, but I doubt you'll need it. You never wanted me, and I doubt you ever did. I heard what you said, Tammy. I'm leaving you the laptop. It contains hours of your writing, proving to me that I could never trust you. Just look at it every now and then when you wonder why I left. I stood up and walked out of the house, leaving a crying Tammy at the kitchen table. What do you think of our story today? It seems to me that if our main character's wife didn't have the nature she had in this story, none of this would have happened. What is your impression of the story? Write in the comments. Until new videos.